Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. It's my pleasure to be here, and now to continue our reading and discussion of the book, Codeword Barbelon. Antichrist is a Woman, Alive and Well Again by P.D. Stewart. Now we're going to talk about current events. We've been talking about current events, and now specifically the Obama administration. Who does Barack Hussein Obama really work for? What religion is he? Is he Christian? Is he Muslim? Or is he Catholic? I think the evidence speaks for itself. Yesterday we were talking about the self-professed words of Barack Obama, who said that he and the Pope were natural allies and that they had a common cause. The Pope and the Protestant president, natural allies, asked the author, having a common cause? What cause is that, Mr. Obama? If you're following along, we're reading the second full paragraph from the bottom of page 365, backing up just a couple paragraphs for continuity purposes, and we'll continue where we left off yesterday. It says, having stated what journalist colleagues were told by Obama's advisors, Mrs. Warner went on to give her own assessment on the Obama's visit to the Pope, saying, quote, I would think that on both a personal level as well as a political one, remember, we've learned copiously throughout these works that the Vatican is first and foremost a political institution. It says, I think that on both a personal level as well as a political one, this visit, that is to see the Pope, is far more than just a courtesy call for the president. This is really one of the highlights of the trip for him, unquote. Yes, it's far more than just a courtesy call to another sovereign leader of an independent state called Vatican City. It's a religious and political meeting, and the American people were obviously not privy to what went on at that meeting. Now, reader, beginning where we left off yesterday, did we read that right? Not only is Mr. Obama profoundly affected by Catholic teachings, but that the visit to see the Pope was the highlight of his trip to Rome. Mr. Obama has placed the concerns of this nation and the issues addressed at the G8 summit secondary to his meeting with the Pope. Did he confess his sins to Papa? Did he bow and kiss the Antichrist ring in his slippered toe? By the way, what is the difference between someone merely being affected by something as opposed to being profoundly affected by it? Do you see the compounded meaning? To be profoundly affected is to be deeply influenced by a thing, at least emotionally, if not intellectually and ideologically, and I will say religiously as well. Reader, we shall see more and more Catholic statecraft seeking to place religion at the heart of social, political, and economic issues. Let me read this again, because this is a very profound statement. We shall see more and more Catholic statecraft, in other words, Catholic government, Roman Catholics in government, Roman Catholic canon law, Roman Catholic political influence in our country seeking to place religion, that is Roman Catholicism, at the heart of social, political, and economic issues. Now, they left out the word religious, but religion is overseeing all of it, okay? Religion is going to affect our social structure, our political structure, and our economic structure in the United States of America. Roman Catholic statecraft. In other words, through politics, they are going to impose a religious influence on social, political, and economic issues in this country. That's the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. Roman Catholicism, the Vatican, is going to use politics to impose its will in every facet of our lives. And if you were with me when we read the encyclical Caritas in Veritate, or rather Richard Bennett's analysis of it, this leaves no room for doubt what the Vatican strategy is, and it's using the American government to do it through politics. And thus, this is why Barack Obama was so intrigued with his meeting with the Pope after the G8 summit. Rome has doctrine on each of these areas, that is social, political, and economic. We dealt with that when we read Richard Bennett's encyclical analysis of the encyclical Caritas in Veritate. And Obama, like his predecessor, is in full agreement with each of them. So we have the President of the United States driven by the Vatican to impose the Vatican's will in every facet of our lives, our own government. And this is just a repeat of literally 1,500 years of history. When the Pope ruled supreme over the kings of the earth, he used the kings of the earth to impose his will upon the people in every facet of their lives. This is simply history repeating itself. For people who are hearing this for the first time and are shocked that there might be any interference between the Vatican and our way of life here in this country, is simply a demonstration of their ignorance of 1,500 years of consistent history. All right, in chapters 23 and 49, we learned a great deal about what these Roman Catholic teachings are. You know, these Roman Catholic teachings that profoundly affects Barack Obama. What are they? We're going to find out what these Roman Catholic teachings are. And the decent reader must surely blush now to think that any educated, intelligent, self-respecting President of the United States would openly confess to being profoundly affected by Roman Catholic teachings. What a thing. Out of the words of our own president, he's profoundly affected by Roman Catholic teaching. And just like his predecessor, George W. Bush, he obviously believes we ought to take John Paul II's teachings seriously and put them into action here in America. This is Vatican control through civil law. This is the usurpation of the sovereignty of this nation, the overthrow of its Constitution and its governing bodies, Congress and the White House. And so we simply now have the Vatican in the driver's seat in Washington, D.C., and in the Supreme Court. Now, chapter 55 is entitled Obama's Jesuit, Socialist, and New World Order Connections. We're going to find out how soon and how Barack Obama's influence began, his education. How did Roman Catholic teaching so profoundly begin to affect President Obama? The author says it's not too surprising that Barack Obama would be so profoundly affected by Roman Catholic teachings, having imbibed these from his Jesuit mentor, Gregory Galuzzo. We mentioned him in an earlier chapter. This fact, Obama's tutelage under a Jesuit priest, is significant for a number of reasons. Here's what Andre de Cuen Quan, the director and lead organizer of ACTS, the Alliance of Communities Transforming Syracuse, had to say on what Jesuit Gregory Galuzzo said about the methods and principles used to train Barack Obama. Quote, Gregory Galuzzo is a former Jesuit and said that many of the organization's principles are rooted in the kind of social justice supported by Catholicism, unquote. No wonder Barack Obama is profoundly affected by Catholic social teachings. He has been indoctrinated by a Jesuit priest. Reader, the Jesuits are almost always of a character that like that of their founder, the wretch Ignatius de Loyola, afterwards called a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. Says J. Huber, who was professor of Catholic theology concerning the Jesuits, quote, now here, listen to this, quote, a mixture of piety and diplomacy, asceticism and worldly wisdom, mysticism and cold calculation, the trademark of this order, unquote. That is to say, intransigent, obdurate, intrepid, unscrupulous, crafty, insinuating, perverse, contumacious, deceptive, sycophantic, reprobate. And Obama was trained by one of these men. How far has the fruit fallen from the tree? We'll have to just see. Sure, the Jesuits are intelligent, sophisticated men, but as the great Dr. Thomas Chalmers observes from his vast experience, quote, the brightest mind may pour its radiance upon the people while it still remains like the northern ice field, cold and impassive, unquote. There's something in particular that intrigues me about Barack Obama's statement that he sees in the Pope a natural ally and that the two have a common cause on international issues. It is important to note that the Pope's views on the redistribution of wealth in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate and his agenda set forth therein echo many of the same themes that Barack Obama campaigned for in 2008. So says Mark Linton, the Roman Catholic who prepared the president for his first meeting with Pope Benedict XVI in 2009. Quote, a former employee of Catholic Relief Services, Linton worked as a legislative assistant in Barack Obama's Senate office before moving over to Obama's presidential campaign to head up Catholic outreach in 2008. So we see the Jesuit influence, the Roman Catholic influence, going from his Illinois Senate office right into his presidency. Another quote says, Mark has access to all the way up to the chain of command in the White House and has delivered a great level of access, said a Catholic social justice activist who requested anonymity. According to the U.S. News, quote, many of Linton's phone calls to American Catholic leaders in July of 2009 focused on how the president could use an encyclical, we're talking about Caritas in Veritate, the unilateral redistribution of the world's wealth dictated to the world by the Pope, that Pope Benedict XVI released Tuesday, July 7, 2009, revolving largely around the global economic crisis to launch a discussion of common goals, unquote. What goals could Obama have in common with Pope Benedict? That I shall soon reveal, says the author. As a result, says a Catholic advisor to President Obama, the White House was excited about the meeting of Barack Obama and the Pope, saying, quote, the encyclical ramped up the level of White House enthusiasm for this meeting because you can't read it without sensing that these two men are seeing economic questions the same way. The Holy Father's emphasis, that is the Pope, the biblical Antichrist emphasis on putting the human person at the center of the economy, strongly echoes themes that Obama campaigned on and is working to implement, unquote. What could these words mean? Quote, seeing economic questions in the same way, unquote, which he, Obama, is said to be, quote, working to implement, unquote? What are these economic questions? Pope Benedict XVI has called for a new world financial order to end the current worldwide financial crisis. More correctly, I will just add, the Pope called for a global government in order to impose these economic changes. And it says the Pope has also called for a reforming of the United Nations and establishing a true world political authority to manage the global economy with God-centered ethics. So there you have it. Here's your governing agency, the United Nations, a true world political authority, is now going to be in charge of global economy to impose God-centered ethics. And what is the God that's going to be centering those ethics? No one but the Pope of Rome. And it says, according to Henry Kissinger, Barack Obama is primed to create this new world order. Kissinger ought to know a thing or two about this new world order. In 1975, in his address before the General Assembly of the United Nations, Kissinger declared, quote, "So we say to all peoples and governments, let us fashion together a new world order," unquote. And again in 1994, he said, quote, "Yes, there will be a new world order, and it will force the United States to change its perceptions," unquote. Kissinger told reporters at the World Affairs Council press conference. Now we're going to talk about Barack Obama's Zbigniew Brzezinski connections. This is diabolical. There's another interesting connection of Barack Obama that is worth our exploration. It is his connection to the man called Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski, a devout Roman Catholic, wrote a book entitled The Grand Chessboard, and I have a copy of that book. I have yet to read it, but I know what it says because I've seen so many reviews of it. In this book, we read the following, quote, "In the long run, global politics are bound to become increasingly uncongenial, unfriendly, to the concentration of hegemonic power in the hands of a single nation." Now, he's talking about the United States of America. They're painting the United States as the global hegemony, Pax Americana, okay? And the quote continues, it says, hence, America is not only the first, as well as the only truly global superpower, but it is also likely to be the very last, unquote, page 209. But Zbigniew Brzezinski, Z-Big as I call him, he failed to tell us, well, he told a little fib. The next hegemonic power in the world is going to be centered on a 108-acre piece of land called Vatican City State. That's going to replace the United States as the global hegemonic power. Vatican City, the smallest nation on the planet. The Bible calls it that great city, that mighty city that reigneth over the kings of the earth. Now, several years ago, Zbigniew, I call him Z-Big, Zbigniew Brzezinski visited Pope John Paul II at his summer residence, Castle Gandolfo. That's right, he got a private visitation with Pope John Paul II at his cushy little private venue in the hills apart from Vatican City. Quote, at a small private mass, get this, the Pope asked Z-Big, a fellow Roman Catholic, to read from the epistles, unquote. What an honor, to get the Pope to ask you to read a portion from the Scriptures. Okay, in a private meeting at Castle Gandolfo, probably one of the most secure institutions, the securely protected enclaves anywhere in the world. Z-Big just waltzes right in and starts reading the Scriptures, okay? And it says, upon reading the 1970 book, Between Two Ages, David Rockefeller lured its writer, Professor Zbigniew Brzezinski away from Columbia University to become the chairman and co-founder of the Trilateral Commission, writes Eric Barger. Now, reader, would you like to hazard a guess as to who is Mr. Obama's top foreign policy advisor? Who sets the foreign policy for this country under the Barack Obama administration? None other than Zbigniew Brzezinski. Apart from his religious and personal ties to the Pope, there's another reason why this should be of concern to us. Zbigniew Brzezinski is also a Council on Foreign Relations member and David Rockefeller's protege. Here's what Mr. Rockefeller said in 1994 at a UN dinner. Quote, "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order," unquote. Rockefeller, who is he? Way back in 1979, United States Senator Barry Goldwater wrote a book in which he called Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller screened and selected every individual who was invited to participate in shaping and administering the proposed New World Order, unquote. Senator Barry Goldwater named Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Goldwater as the movers and the shakers of this New World Order. He said 3 years earlier, in 1975, another respected United States Congressman Larry P. McDonald had warned this. Listen to this. The Rockefeller file is not fiction. It is a compact, powerful, and frightening presentation of what might be the most important story of our lifetime, the drive of the Rockefellers and their allies to create a one-world government combining supercapitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. Not one has dared reveal the most vital part of the Rockefeller story, that the Rockefellers, who are the patrons of the Council on Foreign Relations, and their allies have for the last 50 years been carefully following a plan to use their economic power to gain political control of first America and then the rest of the world. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I'm convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent, unquote. And on September 1st, 1983, Congressman McDonald was killed aboard Korean Airline Flight 747. The flight was allegedly shot down in very suspicious circumstances by Russian Air Force over the Sea of Japan. This is not fiction. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented and accepted fact. The Rockefellers are for real. They are agents of the Vatican. They're in cahoots with the Rothschild banking dynasty, which is controlled by the Jesuit order. The Council on Foreign Relations works for it. So does Zbigniew Brzezinski. And the Rockefellers, and the New World Order for the Pope is their goal. We're going to continue immediately with our reading and discussion of the book Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart. But before I do, I want to preface my further reading with some statements. A reminder that when we read the book, The Vatican Billions by Averell Manhattan, he set forth for us who is the shadow government, not just for the United States, but for the whole world. He reminded us that in the heydays of the papacy, the Dark and Middle Ages, the papacy controlled the kings of the earth. And to see to it that the kings of the earth obeyed the Pope created a shadow government of cardinals and bishops that ruled over archbishoprics and dioceses. In other words, the land was broken up into dioceses, and over each diocese ruled a bishop. And it was the bishop, in control of his priests, who monitored the activities of the secular government and advised the papacy and kept the papacy abreast of the behavior of the kings of Europe. That's the shadow government. It's nearly as old as the Roman Catholic Church itself. And the United States, just like the states of Europe, is divided into archbishoprics and bishoprics, and over which reigns an archbishop or a bishop. Now, your very locality, your city, lies within one of those bishoprics, over which rules a Roman Catholic bishop. And he controls all the Roman Catholic priests in your precinct. And they monitor politics, all the way from federal politics, state politics, and local politics, right down to your school board. And it is this shadow government that picks all the candidates for each political office, nominates all your school board members, and oversees their activities and reports to this central governing authority in the Vatican. Okay, it's well established, well accepted, might be new information to a lot of people, but nonetheless it's true, it's visible, hidden in plain sight. That's the shadow government of every government in the world. Now, with that understanding and that basis, I'll continue reading at the top of page 371 in this book. In 1922, former New York Mayor John F. Hyland, speaking of the Rockefeller cabal, stated, quote, "The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy length over our city, state, and nation. At the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group who virtually run the United States government. They practically control both political parties," unquote. Now, this Hyland, this mayor, points at the Rockefeller Standard Oil cabal and his agents as being the shadow government. But we know that the Rockefeller Standard Oil cabal works for the bishops, the Roman Catholic Church, for the Vatican. So this mayor, John F. Hyland's understanding isn't quite complete. He wants to put all the blame on Rockefeller, but I want my listeners to know that Rockefeller works for the Pope, just as does Zbigniew Brzezinski and Barack Obama and most of the politicians in our government. Now, how many leading statesmen do we need to hear from to believe that a conspiracy of gigantic proportions is afoot? You know what makes this conspiracy so gigantic? Because it's been in the making for 1,500 years under the watchful eye of the Pope. The papacy has been managing the world and building bit by bit this new world order for 1,500 years through this shadow government of bishops, archbishops, and cardinals, and priests. And Rockefeller is just part of it, one of his instrumental cooperative third parties that's helping to amass tremendous wealth, power, and influence to impose the Vatican's will. It is a vast and gigantic conspiracy, but it's not a theory. It's easily researchable. It's plainly visible if you know how to connect all the dots. And it all makes sense, too. It's big because it's been 1,500 years in the making. It involves a huge number of people, but they're all bound by a spiritual imperative, that of the dragon, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. All right, the dragon gave the Pope his seat and power and great authority, and it is through the Pope that the dragon controls the kings of the earth. You talk about a vast conspiracy? It's so vast it makes it completely unbelievable until you see its workings for yourself. Then it's just plug and chug. Easily understandable, easy to point out to other people. And as incredulous as it may sound, it's very real. Now, continuing, it says, in his book, The Keys of This Blood, Malachi Martin wrote, quote, television commentator Bill Moyers found out from Rockefeller during a 15-day globe-spanning trip in the company of David Rockefeller that, quote, just about a dozen or 15 individuals made day-to-day decisions that regulated the flow of capital and goods throughout the entire world, unquote. Does it remind you a little bit of Revelation 18? Have a look at Revelation 18 after the program. Now, the real question is, who controls the Rockefellers? John D. Rockefeller III, the father of Nelson Rockefeller, was so tight with the Pope, that is, Pope Paul VI, that on a visit to the Vatican in 1965, he volunteered to help co-write a papal encyclical entitled Humanae Vitae, the Pope's encyclical on artificial birth control. But the following is even more significant. According to historian William T. Still, the, quote, Rothschilds financed John D. Rockefeller, unquote. In other words, the Rothschilds control the Rockefeller dynasty. Okay, so you ask, who are the Rothschilds? You may have heard of the Vatican lawyer Eugenio Pacelli, also known as Pope Pius XII, also known as Hitler's Pope. Well, Guy de Rothschild, the patriarch of the Rothschild banking dynasty, was Eugenio Pacelli's pen pal 8 years before he became Pope. Why is this significant? He was educated by the Jesuits at the prestigious Lycée Louis le Grand, the Jesuit college in Paris, and was tutored privately by the Jesuits. As I explained in some detail in Book 1, this prestigious Jesuit College of Paris, Elie de Beaumont wrote, quote, has for a long time been a state nursery of the most fertile in great men, unquote. All right, the incubator for the world leaders has been this Jesuit university, a virtual nursery for bringing up servants for the Pope. It has been the most fertile institution in producing great men. The Louis le Grand University in Paris, Jesuit University. And it says in Book 1, the reader will find copious proof that the Lycée Louis le Grand has been for many years a Jesuit incubator. But the clue to the real power behind the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds is given to us by F. Tupper Saucy in his book, Rulers of Evil. I read a passage, a lengthy passage the other day from that particular book, having to do demonstrating the vast control of high-level Roman Catholics in our political institutions, particularly. Well, virtually, they control every aspect of our lives. You heard the lengthy list. It was breathtaking to read it all. All right. Now, F. Tupper Saucy in this same book is going to show us the power behind the Rothschilds. What are the Rothschilds? And this is the part that's always left out of any discussion about the Rothschilds. Many people will focus on them being Jews, which is correct, and they're being Freemasons, which is also correct. But almost universally left out of any discussion about the Rothschilds is the information that I'm about to give you. And it's key information. This is what it says in F. Tupper Saucy's book, Rulers of Evil. It comes from the Encyclopedia Judaica. Listen to what he says. Aware that the Rothschilds are an important Jewish family, I looked them up in the Encyclopedia Judaica and discovered that they bear the title Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The appointment of Rothschild gave the Black Papacy, that is the Black Pope, the Jesuit general, absolute financial privacy and secrecy. who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? Unquote. So you have all of these conspiracy theories, which the Bible will not support, that the Jews rule the world. As we've said so many times on the program, it bears repeating, Daniel gave us the outline. There would be 4 Gentile world empires until Christ returns. 4 and only 4, and they would be Gentile empires. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Rome was in power. The 4th and final was in power even before Christ was born. That's why Christ said, these are the last days. He was referring to Daniel's prophecy. The 4th and final beast on the earth would be Rome. And it was Rome who crucified Christ. All right? There cannot be a Jewish global hegemony. There cannot be a 5th global empire. So you could just scratch out any reference to a Jewish conspiracy to rule the world, except for this case where these Orthodox Jews, these Freemasons, trained at the Lycée Louis le Grand under Jesuit instruction, have simply become the Pope's bankers. Okay? This is confirmed in the Encyclopedia Judaica. They are known as the guardians of the Vatican Treasury. So the next time when you start talking about the Rothschilds, don't forget to mention that they're the Pope's bankers. They are the bankers for the Jesuit general. The Jesuit general conducts all of his clandestine global operations through the Rothschild banking dynasty. And it is the Rothschild banking dynasty that's in cahoots with the Rockefeller clan and the Council on Foreign Relations. So the author continues, he says, yes, who would ever have guessed? In 2007, the Encyclopedia Judaica won the prestigious Dartmouth Medal and was lauded as the standard work on Judaism since first appearing in early 1970s. In May of 2008, the American Libraries Association said this encyclopedia, quote, consider this set the definitive source on Jewish life, culture, religion, and history, unquote. And the Library Journal of 1972 called it, quote, an indispensable reference tool, unquote. And I'll tell you what's indispensable about it, in my opinion. It plainly exposes the Orthodox Jewish Freemasonic family, the Rothschilds, as the guardians of the Vatican Treasury. That's huge. The guardians of the Vatican Treasury. And it reminds me of a passage of Scripture that simply won't leave me whenever this discussion comes up. The Jews who crucified Christ said, we have no king but Caesar. And who is Caesar today but the Pope of Rome? And who is the warring servant of the Pope of Rome but the Jesuit order? And they control the world's economy through the Rothschilds. And this economic crisis has been orchestrated by the Jesuit general through his Rothschild banking dynasty, and Rockefeller is as much a part of it as anyone else. These crises that we're suffering in the world are simply social engineering, purposefully conducted in order to steer all the people in one direction. A clamor for some global financial organization that will control the economy and stop this sinful corruption in the world economy. We need a God-centered economy. We need God in economics. And the Pope just steps right up and said, well, I'm God, and I'll put God-centered ethics in the world's economic crisis, and I'll give the UN real teeth so it can enforce global economic reform. So there you have. You've got your God. Rome. Never is it considered what God's rule was for money. We've just simply let the Pope become the authority for the economies of the world. And he's going to give us a solution. You know what's going to be called? The mark of the beast. And the whole world wonders after the beast. We're going to get just what the world calls for. And we call for whatever the Jesuits prop up in front of us, and then create all the crises to lead us all in the whatever direction they want us to go. And we have to recognize these things. We have to talk about these things. We have to educate other people about it so that we no longer be deceived. The Rothschilds are the guardians of the Vatican treasury. They sit in charge of the immense, incalculable wealth of the Vatican, of the Roman Catholic Church. Through this power, they control politics, social structure, everything. And we simply have to accept it. And accept this as fact is what I'm trying to say. And then expose it. And warn God's people about it. Now, yes, who would ever have guessed? The 2007 Encyclopedia Judaica won the prestigious Dartmouth Medal and was lauded as the standard work on Judaism. They called it an indispensable reference tool. The British journalist and best-selling author Avril Manhattan, in his classic work, The Vatican Billions, as I've already cited, confirms F. Tupper Saucy's testimony. Quote, the celebrated Jewish house of Rothschilds, who incidentally had been lending money to the Vatican since 1831, came once more to the fore with the buying and selling and amalgamation of millions of shares and other investments on behalf of the Vatican. The beginning of this liaison between the Rothschilds and the Vatican was 1969 and 70, when the Vatican sold the controlling share of the giant Immobilier to the Paribus Trans Company of Luxembourg, which was controlled by the mighty Banque de Paris. This was controlled by the French branch of the Rothschilds. Afterwards, the Vatican sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of shares and other investments to Hambros Bank and the Continental Bank of Illinois, at the time presided over by David Kennedy, the U.S. Treasury Minister. So here you have the U.S. Treasury cooperating with the Pope. It's interesting to remember that the President of the French Republic, Mr. Pompidou, for many years worked for the private bank of the Rothschilds. And guess what? Pompidou was a graduate of Louis Le Grand, too. Avril Manhattan continues on page 137, quote, as in Italy, the United States, and other countries, most of her property, shares, bonds, are camouflaged behind the names of individual Roman Catholic laymen and even purely financial or banking or industrial concerns, unquote. So the Vatican knows how to protect her money from audits, from public disclosure. The vast Vatican wealth is protected and hidden behind individual lay Roman Catholics, banking industry, and industrial concerns. The following demonstrate the great influence the Rothschilds exercise over the United States financial system as far back as 1875. The Friend of 1875, volume 48, page 200, states, quote, the Rothschilds and their associates have concluded with the United States Treasury a contract for $25 billion, new 5% bonds, and that with this contract goes the privilege of taking the entire unsold remainder any time within 6 months. This makes a total of $80 million taken by the Rothschilds and associates. And Emanuel Mann Josephson, page 5 of this 1968 book, The Federal Reserve Conspiracy and Rockefellers, says, quote, "The Rothschilds have been the fiscal agents of the Vatican," unquote. Corrado Pellenberg, on page 126 of his 1971 book, Vatican Finances, states, quote, "We know that the Vatican has ties with the Rothschilds, with the Morgan Bank, and the Bankers Trust," unquote. And Sir Owen Seaman and Mark Lemon, on page 104 of their book, London Charivari, tells us, quote, "There are close links with the Rothschilds. The Vatican is in daily touch with Zurich and Wall Street," unquote. And Nino Lobello, a former Roman correspondent, tells us, too, that in July of 1870, the Vatican floated a loan of $200,000 from the House of Rothschild, unquote. Reader, as master of finance, the Rothschilds have no superiors. And the world needs to know that the Vatican invests its funds in foreign banks through the Rothschilds. The accumulated wealth of the Rothschilds is still today at Rome's disposal. So when the Pope calls for a new world order, he does so knowing that he has the ear of the world's leaders, because he has the power of the Rothschilds and the Rockefeller dynasties on his side. President Barack Obama is connected to the Vatican not only through his previous Jesuit mentor Gregory Galuzzo and by his many years of working for the Catholic Church in Chicago, but also through his foreign policy advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, 33rd degree Freemason, and Rockefellers, Knights of Malta, through the Rothschilds, the guardians of the Vatican treasury. Indeed, since Barack Obama was mentored by the Jesuits, it is not a stretch to say that he may well be one of their agents. For as one ex-pupil of the Jesuits who had studied under them for 8 years said of his former masters, the Jesuits, quote, "The objective of the disciples of Loyola, known as the Jesuits, is to acquire the highest offices of state for the men that they have poisoned with their maxims," unquote. And the Italian scholar and former priest, Professor Paolo Sarpi, observed, quote, "The Roman Catholic Church is a political conspiracy," unquote. And what makes that so easy to understand is the visible interference of the Vatican in world politics and the realization that the Vatican has been trying to build a global religion, a global social, a global economic, and a global political government almost from the very beginning. As the self-professed vicar of Christ, he claims for himself all the prerogatives of Christ, to rule and reign supreme. But he's a liar. And the one who give him his seat and power and great authority is the father of lies, the dragon, Satan himself. It is through the papacy. It is through the papacy that the dragon seeks to fulfill his false prophecy of Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12 through 14. But God immediately answers with verse 15. Have a look at it before the program tomorrow. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. The false prophet is none other than Satan himself, and he seeks to fulfill that prophecy through the papacy and all of his minions. And now it's visible in the earth.